and certainly with less experienced drivers it would have been anything but safe to have set off amidst the darkness of the storm, down precipitous descents and over torrents swelled by the rain. The Count de Regla, who, attracted by the plentiful supply of water in this ravine, conceived the idea of employing part of his enormous fortune in the construction of these colossal works, must have had an imagination on a large scale. The English directors, whose wives bury themselves in such abysses, ought to feel more grateful to them than any other husbands towards their sacrificing better halves. For the men, occupied all day amongst their workmen and machinery, and returning late in the evening to dine and sleep, there is no great self-immolation; but a poor woman living all alone, in a house fenced in by gigantic rocks, with no other sound in her ears from morning till night but the roar of thunder, or the clang of machinery, had need for her personal comfort to have either a most romantic imagination, so that she may console herself with feeling like an enchanted princess in a giant's castle, or a most commonplace spirit, so that she may darn stockings to the sound of the waterfall, and feel no other inconvenience from the storm, but that her husband will require dry linen when he comes home. As for us, we were drenched before we reached the carriage, into which the water was pouring, and when we set off once more amidst the rapidly increasing darkness, and over these precipitous roads, we thought that our chance of reaching the proposed haven that night was very small. After much toil to the horses, we got out of the ravines, and found ourselves once more on the great plains, where the tired animals ploughed their way over fields and ditches and great stones, and among trees and tangled bushes, an occasional flash of lightning our only guide. Great was our joy when, about 11 o'clock, a man riding on in advance, shouted out that the lights of Tepenacasco were in sight, and still more complete our satisfaction when we drove round the tank into the courtyard of the hacienda. We were received with great applause by the inmates, and were not sorry to rest after a very fatiguing yet agreeable day. Mexico, 21st. We left Tepenacasco the day before yesterday. Our journey was very dangerous, in consequence of the great rains, which had swelled the torrents, especially as we set off late, and most of it was performed by night. In these barrancas, carriages and horsemen have been frequently swept away and dashed in pieces over the precipices. But to make our situation more disagreeable, we had scarcely set off before a terrible storm of thunder and rain again came on with more violence than the night preceding. It grew perfectly dark, and we listened with some alarm to the roaring torrents, over which, especially over one, not many leagues from Sopayuca, where we were to spend the night, it was extremely doubtful whether we could pass. The carriage was full of water, but we were too much alarmed to be uneasy about trifles. Amidst the howling of the wind and the pealing of thunder, no one could hear the other speak. Suddenly, by a vivid flash of lightning, the dreaded barranca appeared in sight for a moment, and almost before the drivers could stop them, the horses had plunged in. It was a moment of mortal fear such as I shall never forget. The shrieks of the drivers to encourage the horses, the loud cries of Ave Maria, the uncertainty as to whether our heavy carriage could be dragged across, the horses struggling and splashing in the boiling torrent, and the horrible fate that awaited us should one of them fall or falter. The Señora and I shut our eyes and held each other's hands, and certainly no one breathed till we were safe on the other side. We were then told that we had crossed within a few feet of a precipice, over which a coach had been dashed into 50 pieces during one of these swells, and of course every one killed; and that, if instead of horses we had travelled with mules, we must have been lost. You may imagine that we were not sorry to reach Sopayuca, where the people ran out to the door at the sound of carriage wheels, and could not believe that we had passed the barranca that night, as 2 or 3 horsemen who had rode in that direction had turned back, and pronounced it impassable. Lights and supper were soon procured, and by way of interlude a monstrous bull, of great fame in these parts, was led up to the supper table for our inspection, with a rope through his nose. A fierce brute, but familiarly called El Chato, the flat nose, from the shortness of his horns. The lightning continued very vivid, and they told us that a woman had been struck there some time before, while in the chapel by night. We rose at 4 o'clock the next morning, and set off for Mexico. The morning, as usual after these storms, was peculiarly fresh and beautiful, but the sun soon grew oppressive on the great plains. About 2 o'clock we entered Mexico by the Guadalupe gate. We found our house in status quo, agreeable letters from Europe, great preparations making for the English ball, to assist at which we have returned sooner than we otherwise should, and for which my femme de chambre has just completed a dress for me, very much to her own satisfaction. Letter the 17th.